streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Open the borders, close the camps! Free the refugees! Louder! Open the borders, close the camps! Free the refugees!
I've been asked to talk about the movement last time, because like a lot of people here, I walked up and down this street and streets all over this country for refugee rights under the previous Howard government. It was Howard, of course, that took the Labor Party policy of mandatory detention and 10 years ago turned that into a public exhibition of torture that hadn't been seen in this country for a long time. And I thought wouldn't be exceeded in this country for a long time. So you can talk an awful lot about what it takes to build a movement. It takes a shitload to build a movement. It takes people to build a movement. It takes politics to build a movement. Point number one is persistence. Don't let anyone tell us that we don't have any effect. Every time we take to the streets, we give people heart. We give heart to the people who are behind the razor wire. We give heart to the people who are facing deportation to a malarial prison camp in PNG. And that heart can keep people alive. So that's the first effect that we can have by taking to the streets. Every time we take to the streets, we show the people of Melbourne that the so-called consensus of cruelty between Labor and Liberal doesn't apply to us, that there's hundreds, even thousands of people that are prepared to break with that consensus and stand up for human rights. That's the point of staying in the streets. The other point of staying in the streets is that if we march up and down long enough, it actually has a political effect. And last time, there were plenty of people that told us we were wasting our time, and we never actually changed the government's policy. We never managed to overturn the policy of mandatory detention, but year after year, taking to the streets, we wore the bastards down. We helped to change public opinion, we gave heart to the refugee resistance inside, and there are people walking the streets of Melbourne today who would not have been released from those camps if it wasn't for people such as ourselves taken to the streets. So persistence is number one. Momentum is number two. And it's been fantastic over the last few weeks to see not just one, not just two, three, four, and many more meetings and protests planned. Momentum is a very scarce commodity in politics, and when we have it, we have to use it. So commendation to everyone for turning out, not just for one token effort, but to keep on coming out in solidarity with our brothers and sisters behind the razor wire. The third point I wanted to make is solidarity. There's plenty of signs around here for compassion, and I've got nothing against compassion. If you've got blood in your veins, you are going to see the sort of treatment that's dished out to our brothers and sisters who are coming here by boat, has got to stir something in you. And if that gets you to the streets, that's all well and good. But for me, solidarity really is the key. And that is saying, as Martin Luther King put it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Or as the old trade union slogan puts it, an injury to one is an injury to all. We saw it in the Howard years. The public torture of thousands of refugees locked up without charge or trial for year after year lowers the bar on human rights for everyone. It makes it easier for someone like a Howard to attack union rights, to attack gay rights, to attack people on the pension and so on. And Rudd and Gillard have continued that agenda. So we need to be aware we either go forward together or we go back together.
The point is, not only do you have to be there with your hand and fist in the air, ready to fight, because unless we keep fighting, we are not going to win. We are not going to win. Now, not only do you have to be there, you've got to go back to your families. You've got to go back to your workplaces. You have to listen for the racist whisper on a tram, and you have to confront it. You have to say to people that in our public space, racism in any form will not be tolerated. Racism, homophobia and sexism will not be tolerated in any form. Who here is willing to take that fight onto the workplaces, into their family home, and onto the trams when they see racism? Who? Yeah, that's what I thought, because it's an important one, because we need to see the kind of country we want to live in, and that's why we're here.
Australia's name is being blackened around the world because of the way our government and the coalition portrays and treats asylum seekers. Like Nazim said, I did come as a refugee to Australia. I came to Australia as a 13-year-old unaccompanied minor back in 1997. And I did witness some horrible things carried out by the Sri Lankan government, its army and its supporters. When I came to Australia, and some of you know this, when I came to Australia, I came with memories of witnessing my 14-year-old brother who was cut in half by the Sri Lankan army. I came with memories of witnessing my classmate hanging on a tamarind tree by his intestines. I came with memories of picking up my 6-year-old cousin's body in pieces in a plastic bag. I came with the hope that one day the international community would intervene and stop the genocidal acts of the Sri Lankan government against my own people. The evidence is there in the coffin of a 17-year-old boy in Veliveria who was shot dead by Sri Lankan army only this week for seeking clean water. It is there in the stories of every refugee who are coming to our shores pleading for help. All we need now is the courage and empathy to step up and help those who cannot help themselves. Not handball our responsibility to a third world country that is struggling to look after its own citizens. We call on the Australian government to stand side by side with the international human rights organisations, not with the Sri Lankan ambassador who is an alleged war criminal, nor the visiting war criminals from Sri Lanka. In November this year, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting will be held in Sri Lanka. Australian government and Australia's Foreign Minister Bob Carr has already promised to help the Sri Lankan government with the setting up of this huge conference. We want Australia to boycott Chogam. We should call for an independent international investigation into alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Yay!
We should push for an internationally supervised referendum in the Tamil homeland.
The mission ahead of us, for as long as it takes, is to make it untenable for any party, Labor, Liberal, National, in Australia to treat refugees in the racist way they're being treated right now. We need to make the PNG solution, as they call it, completely untenable for any party. And looking forward, we need to build the movement that will make it untenable. Not only because this policy is a racist attack on refugees, but equally because when our government erects barbed wire fences to lock out refugees, they ideologically erect barbed wire fences that cut across our communities and they divide us all. It is the conversations we have every day that have the power to get people out on the streets. That's how we're going to convince people against the PNG solution. Let's not think that people are fixed in their ideas. People are amenable to a humanitarian argument, but we must remember that if you have lived in Australia for the last 10 years, you have lived under a sustained campaign of anti-refugee propaganda, and people have been genuinely scared, hoodwinked and misled about the issue of refugees. Our task is to find the words to take on this propaganda with whomever we come in contact with. And when our friends say, but street marches, they don't change anything, we say, history begs to differ. It was the people's movement. It was the people's movement in the early 2000s that forced the ALP's hand last time to initially bring children out of detention. It was piecemeal, but I tell you it was the movement that did it.
There may be some people here today who might ask, why is there somebody from a trade union speaking at a refugee rally? There is a long history of workers who support unions being persecuted because of their belief in standing up for workers' rights. There are still many countries where workers people that work for unions or people that are members of unions are in danger for that very reason. All people fleeing for their safety have the right to ask Australia for asylum, and we believe it's Australia's responsibility to treat these people with respect and dignity. Toll is a large transport and logistics company that now operates globally, and they have an annual revenue in excess of $8.5 billion. The reason I'm mentioning Toll is because last week it was reported that Toll Logistics spent a lot of money sending Liberal politician Scott Morrison and News Limited journalists over to Nauru in an attempt to secure a contract based on extending the detention centre which detains refugees seeking asylum in Australia. On that same day, Toll management in Melbourne tried to terminate an NUW delegate for the first time for wanting to phone his union organiser, a right that he has in writing in his workplace agreement. Toll operates as a third party in the warehousing industry. What that really means is that they exist to drive down wages and conditions for extremely profitable corporations with the simple signing of a new contract. Yesterday, the same NUW delegate was terminated a third time without reason in writing, except for vague references to a lack of respect and dishonesty. So that's what Toll has given an NUW delegate as reasons to terminate his position. At another Toll site, an NUW manager asked management to explain their lack of respect after news broke on their involvement in Nauru, and this request was ignored by management. Many NUW members emailed and used Facebook to demand that the NUW endorse and support these rallies, which is one of the reasons that we have. Some of those members are marching with us today.
Personally, I work in the homelessness sector, so I work with people who are on public housing waiting lists, and they say to me things like, "Liz, I've been on the waiting list for 15 years and I can't get a house because the government gives my house to the refugees." Well, it's not true. It's bull dust. Officially, they're actually not eligible. So this is one of the myths that we need to be stopping in their tracks, and we need to be telling people when they say these kinds of things, it's just not true. So there are other myths out there, like that you've lost your job, you can't get another one because the refugees took the job. Well, it's not true. We all know that just doesn't happen. Or like, New Start allowance is not enough. That's right. No one can actually live off New Start allowance if you live in Melbourne or a city or anywhere where there's actually population. But this is not because the government's given all the money to the refugees, but the problem is it's too convenient for the government to have people actually scapegoating each other than getting systemically organised into a direct democracy and actually putting more pressure onto the government. So when people who are homeless say, "I need to have my public house, I have human needs," you know, they've got a right to have their needs met, yeah? So we should be standing by them, and we should be saying to them, yeah, but like, it's not the guy next to you who's a refugee who's also in need. Like, there should be enough houses for everybody, yeah?
And I just want to quickly say that Sri Lanka is an island where over 40,000 Tamils were killed in May 2009, and over 146,000 Tamils are unaccounted for. We cannot simply ignore this or forget this. Welcome Tamil asylum seekers, welcome all refugees. Thank you.